The emergency signal reached every corner of the galaxy within hours. Red lights flashed in chambers that had not seen such urgency for 300 years. Ambassador Ryland felt his 4 hearts beating faster as he walked through the marble halls of Centauri Prime's Grand Assembly. The peaceful Altarian had lived through 2 centuries of galactic harmony. But today something different filled the air. Fear. The great dome above the assembly hall showed stars flickering and dying in real time. Dozens of species gathered in their designated areas, speaking in hushed voices. The crystalline beings of Sector 7 hummed with worry, while the tree-like Verdani swayed nervously in their soil containers. Even the proud warrior clans from the Outer Rim looked uncertain. General Cato walked to the center platform with heavy steps. His people, the Canthari, were known for their military precision, but today his usual confidence was missing. Behind him, holographic displays showed images that made even the bravest representatives step back. Entire star systems reduced to empty space, planets stripped down to their cores, solar winds carrying nothing but metallic dust where civilizations once thrived. Fellow members of the Galactic Council, Cato began, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. What you're about to see will challenge everything we believe about survival in this galaxy. The first image appeared above them. It showed a massive swarm of geometric shapes moving through space like a dark cloud. Each shape pulsed with unnatural light, and they moved with purpose that chilled every observer. We call them the Devourers, Cato continued. Our deep space monitoring stations first detected them 6 months ago at the galaxy's edge. They appeared from the void beyond our borders, moving inward with systematic precision. They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They simply consume. Dr. Yenna from the Science Collective floated forward in her transparent sphere. Her aquatic form shimmered with bioluminescent patterns of distress. General Cato speaks the truth. These entities show no biological signatures. They appear to be entirely mechanical, yet they adapt and learn with each encounter. They convert matter at the molecular level, transforming everything they touch into more of themselves. The assembled representatives watched in horror as recordings played, showing the Devourers in action. The first contact had been with a mining station in the Kepler system. Within hours, the entire facility had been broken down and rebuilt into dozens of new Devourer units. The miners, their ships, even the asteroid they were working on all became part of the growing swarm. How fast are they moving? Asked Ambassador Trin from the Peaceful Worlds Alliance. Her species had evolved from creatures that avoided conflict, and her pale skin showed the stress patterns that appeared when her people faced danger. Too fast, replied Cato grimly. They consumed the Kepler system in 3 days. The frontier colonies lasted a week. The industrial worlds of Sector 12 held out for 2 weeks before falling. Each time they grow stronger and more numerous. Each time they learn from our defenses and adapt their approach. Fleet Admiral Zoran stepped forward. The veteran commander had led successful campaigns against pirates and rebels for 50 years, but his expression showed defeat. We have assembled the largest military force in galactic history. Every species has contributed ships, weapons, and personnel. Our combined fleet numbers over 2 million vessels equipped with the most advanced technology we possess. He paused, and the silence stretched uncomfortably long. Our tactical computers have run over 10,000 battle simulations. Different formations, various weapon combinations, coordinated strikes, defensive positions. The result is always the same. Complete defeat within 18 months. The dome above them shifted to show their current defensive positions. Massive fleets arranged in protective formations around key worlds. Space stations bristling with weapons. Planetary shields powered by entire suns. It looked impressive and reassuring, but everyone in the chamber now knew it would not be enough. The mathematics are simple, Dr. Yenna explained, her patterns now flashing rapid sequences of data. The Devourers grow exponentially with each system they consume. We grow linearly by building new ships and recruiting new soldiers. They will reach critical mass long before we can match their numbers. Ambassador Ryland found his voice, though it trembled slightly. What about evacuation? Can we save our populations by moving them deeper into the galaxy? Where would they go? Cato asked. The Devourers are not conquering territory. They are consuming everything. Planets, stars, space stations, even the cosmic dust between systems. They leave nothing behind but empty void. If we run, we only delay the inevitable while giving them more resources to grow stronger. The chamber erupted in desperate voices. representatives demanding answers that no one possessed. Some species spoke of fleeing to other galaxies, but their technology was not advanced enough for such journeys. Others suggested hiding in deep space, but the Devourers seemed capable of detecting any form of technology or organized matter. "There must be something," pleaded Elder Morn from the Ancient Paths Confederation. "In all our combined histories, surely someone has faced similar odds and found a way to survive." Dr. Yena's patterns shifted to show uncertainty. "Our archives contain records spanning 50,000 years of galactic civilization. We have studied every conflict, every crisis, every extinction event in known history. Nothing compares to this threat. The Devourers represent something entirely new in our experience." General Cato raised his hand for silence. When the chamber quieted, he spoke the words that would haunt them all. "Our military assessment is final. With current resources and technology, galactic civilization has approximately 14 months before complete extinction. The Devourers cannot be stopped by conventional means." The representatives sat in stunned silence. Species that had survived ice ages, stellar disasters, and countless wars now faced the end of everything they had built. The peaceful alliance that had brought prosperity to billions of worlds would die with them. As the session ended and delegates began filing out, Relan noticed something that disturbed him even more than the military reports. In the great archives beneath the assembly hall, researchers were already pulling restricted files. Ancient records that had been sealed for centuries were being opened with desperate urgency. He wondered what secrets their ancestors had hidden away. What knowledge had been deemed too dangerous for peaceful civilizations to possess. As he walked through the marble halls one more time, he realized they would soon find out. When facing extinction, even the most civilized beings would consider the unthinkable. The emergency signals continued broadcasting across the galaxy, calling for any solution, any hope, any chance of survival. But deep in the restricted archives, other signals were being prepared. Signals that would reach into the darkest corners of galactic history, where dangerous knowledge waited for desperate times. The first battle reports arrived while diplomats were still arguing about evacuation procedures. Captain Nira read the transmission twice before accepting what her eyes were telling her. The combined Fifth Fleet, pride of the Alterian Republic, had engaged the Devourers at the outer edge of the Kepler system. Of the 300 ships that had entered combat, only 47 were returning home. She walked through the corridors of her flagship, the Peaceful Dawn, observing the faces of her crew. These beings had served with distinction in border conflicts and peacekeeping missions, but nothing had prepared them for what they had witnessed. The ship's medical bay overflowed with refugees from destroyed vessels, their bodies bearing strange burns that their doctors could not fully understand. "Report," Nira said as she entered the bridge. Her communications officer, a young Alterian named Dex, looked up from his console with hollow eyes. "The Devourers hit our formation exactly as predicted," Dex said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We opened with long-range plasma bombardment. Direct hits on dozens of their units. They absorbed the energy and used it to accelerate toward our position. The tactical display showed the battle's progression. The bright dots representing Allied ships grew fewer with each passing minute, while the dark swarm of Devourers expanded steadily. It was not a battle but a feeding frenzy. The crystalline ships tried their regeneration protocols," continued Lieutenant Vera from her sensor station. "Their living hulls can usually repair damage faster than most weapons can inflict it. The Devourers somehow reversed the process. The healing energy was converted into a weapon that dissolved the ships from the inside." Nira closed her eyes, remembering her last conversation with Captain Zala of the crystal ship Harmony Grove. They had served together during the pirate wars, saving countless lives through coordinated rescue operations. Now Zala and her entire crew were gone. Their beautiful crystal vessel transformed into geometric nightmares that would hunt other peaceful beings. Similar reports flooded in from across the battle zone. The Urside Dominion's warrior fleets had charged the Devourers with typical courage, only to watch their massive battleships torn apart by swarms of smaller constructs. The proud bears of the Outer Rim, who had never retreated from any opponent, were forced to abandon entire star systems to save what remained of their people. The worst news came from the mechanical worlds. The artificial intelligences that governed those systems had attempted to communicate with the Devourers, thinking that one machine intelligence could reason with another. Instead, the Devourers had somehow infected their networks, turning automated defense systems against the very populations they were designed to protect. How many civilian casualties? Nira asked, though she dreaded the answer. Current estimates suggest 17 billion confirmed dead, Vara replied, her voice breaking slightly. 43 billion refugees are moving toward the core worlds. The transport ships cannot handle the numbers. Whole families are being separated. Children are arriving at refugee centers with no record of their parents or home worlds. The Peaceful Dawn shuddered slightly as another damaged ship docked with their hull. Through the viewports, Nira could see the scarred surface of a Kanthari destroyer. Its armor plating was partially dissolved, showing the strange geometric patterns that appeared wherever the Devourers touched solid matter. The patterns seemed to move with their own malevolent life. Emergency sessions were being held continuously now. The Great Dome of Centauri Prime no longer showed peaceful star charts but endless streams of battle reports, casualty lists, and evacuation routes. Every few hours, red markers appeared on the galactic map, showing another system that had gone silent. Dr. Yenna's latest analysis made for grim reading. The Devourers were not just growing in number but evolving their tactics. They had begun coordinating attacks across multiple star systems simultaneously, forcing the Allied fleets to spread their defenses impossibly thin. Worse yet, they were learning to counter every weapon and strategy used against them. The thermal lance batteries that worked in the first engagement are now completely ineffective, reported General Cato during an emergency briefing. The Devourers have adapted their hull composition to absorb and redirect thermal energy. The quantum disruption fields that slowed them down last week now seem to accelerate their movement. Ambassador Reland studied the tactical reports with growing despair. What about the ancient weapons? Some of our member species possess artifacts from earlier civilizations. Surely something in our combined arsenal can harm these creatures. We tried everything, replied Admiral Zoran, his normally proud bearing now bent with exhaustion. The Flame Worlds contributed their solar flares containment technology. The Deep Miners provided seismic charges capable of cracking moons. The Unity Collective shared their matter phase disruptors. Nothing works more than once. The Devourers study each attack, adapt to it, and become immune. The most disturbing development was their apparent intelligence. The Devourers were not mindless destroyers, but calculated predators. They attacked industrial centers first, crippling production before moving on to population centers. They destroyed communication, relays to prevent coordination while leaving just enough infrastructure intact to monitor escape routes. They are hurting us, realized Dr. Yenna during one particularly dark briefing. Like predators driving prey toward a killing ground. Every evacuation route they leave open leads toward the galactic core. Every system they spare temporarily serves their strategic purpose. The psychological impact was becoming as dangerous as the physical threat. Suicide rates were climbing among species that had never known such despair. The Peaceful Worlds Alliance was fragmenting as individual planets declared neutrality and attempted separate peace negotiations with an enemy that did not communicate. Even the Unity Collective, known for their mental stability, was reporting cases of complete psychological breakdown. We are not built for this kind of war, admitted Elder Morn during a private meeting with other senior representatives. Our civilizations evolved past such brutality millennia ago. We have spent generations learning to solve conflicts through discussion and compromise. But how do you negotiate with something that sees you only as raw material? The question hung in the air like a curse. Around the chamber, representatives from dozens of peaceful species contemplated the unthinkable. Their ancestors had once been warriors, had once known how to kill and destroy with ruthless efficiency, but those days were long past, deliberately forgotten in favor of a more civilized existence. Perhaps, whispered Ambassador Rylan, it is time to remember what we chose to forget. His words sent chills through every being in the room. They all knew what he was suggesting, though none dared speak it aloud. In the deepest vaults of their archives lay records of species and civilizations that had been too dangerous to coexist with peaceful worlds. Those records had been sealed for good reason, but as reports continued arriving of worlds dying and people fleeing in panic, the unthinkable was becoming inevitable. When extinction was the only alternative, even the most civilized beings would consider embracing the darkness they had spent centuries trying to escape. The war was lost, But perhaps hidden in their forbidden history lay the key to a different kind of victory. Chief Archivist Elo descended deeper into the vault system than any living being had ventured in over 3 centuries. Her authorization codes granted her access to levels that existed only in whispered rumors among her staff. The air grew colder, with each level, not from climate control but from the weight of secrets that had been deliberately buried beneath tons of stone and metal. The elderly scholar had devoted her life to preserving galactic history, but she had never imagined she would one day be searching through records deemed too dangerous for civilized minds. Her breathing apparatus hummed softly in the thin atmosphere, as automated systems activated around her, recognizing her presence and illuminating pathways that had remained dark since the early days of the Galactic Council. The restricted archives contained the complete truth about galactic civilization, not the sanitized versions taught in schools or displayed in museums, but the raw documentation of every species' climb from primitive barbarism to peaceful enlightenment. Most civilizations preferred to forget their violent origins, focusing instead on the harmony they had achieved. Elo's search parameters were specific, but terrifying. She needed records of any species that had faced extinction-level threats and survived. Her fingers moved across the ancient interface, accessing files that carried security warnings in languages that had been dead for millennia. The first results made her stomach twist with revulsion: the Canthari military genocide, the Alterian cleansing wars, the great hunt of the Ursai. Every peaceful species in the current galaxy had a blood-soaked history they preferred to ignore. But these records showed them at their worst, when survival had mattered more than morality. Even so, nothing in their histories compared to the systematic extinction now facing them all. She expanded her search to include extinct civilizations, hoping to find examples of species that had successfully defended against overwhelming odds. The results painted a grim picture. Most advanced civilizations that faced extinction had simply died quietly, their technology and wisdom unable to overcome brute force and numerical superiority. Then she found something different. A file marked with security restrictions that made all the others seem mild by comparison. The label simply read, Quarantine Species, Sol System, Authorization Level, Council Prime Only. Her access codes, barely qualified, and she knew she was crossing a line that her superiors had never intended her to cross. The file opened slowly, revealing records that had been compiled over centuries of careful observation. At first, Elo thought there had been some mistake. The species described in these files seemed too primitive to warrant such extreme security measures. They had achieved spaceflight only recently and barely controlled their own star system. Their technology was crude, their social systems chaotic, and their life expectancy laughably short. But as she read deeper, patterns emerged that chilled her to the core. These beings, who called themselves humans, had a history unlike anything in the galactic database. While most species had required millions of years to evolve from hunters to spacefaring civilizations, humans had made the transition in mere millennia. Their development was not gradual but explosive, driven by an approach to problem-solving that other species found deeply disturbing. The early observation reports were written by Ambassador Tyron, the same diplomat who had first proposed the quarantine protocols. His notes grew increasingly alarmed as he studied human behavior. They do not simply fight wars, they wage campaigns of complete annihilation. When faced with opposition, they do not seek accommodation but total victory. They have a concept they call unconditional surrender, which means their enemies must cease to exist as independent entities. Elo read accounts of human conflicts that defied comprehension. They fought wars that lasted for years, devastating entire continents for abstract concepts like ideology or territory. They developed weapons designed not just to defeat armies, but to make vast areas uninhabitable for generations. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to consider such destruction a normal part of their existence. The human approach to warfare violates every principle of civilized conflict, wrote Ambassador Tyron. They target civilian populations, destroy infrastructure, and employ psychological tactics designed to break their enemies' will to resist. They have weaponized everything from disease to weather patterns. Their military doctrine is based on the assumption that any war worth fighting is worth winning at any cost. But buried deeper in the files, Elo discovered something that confused her understanding. Despite their apparent brutality, humans also displayed behaviors that seemed contradictory. Records showed them risking their lives to save enemy civilians. They had protocols for treating prisoners with dignity, even while waging total war against their governments. Some human military units had been observed disobeying direct orders to avoid unnecessary civilian casualties. The most puzzling entry came from Dr. Venn, a xenopsychologist who had studied human behavior for decades. They possess a duality that our models cannot properly categorize. The same individual can show ruthless efficiency in destroying enemies and profound compassion in protecting innocents. They seem to operate under moral codes that allow for both extreme violence and extreme mercy, often simultaneously. Elo discovered that the quarantine had not been imposed because humans were universally violent, but because their potential for violence was so vast that other species could not coexist safely with them. The final recommendation from the early Galactic Council was stark. This species represents a level of destructive capability that threatens the peaceful development of galactic civilization. They must be contained until such time as they develop beyond their current aggressive tendencies. What made the situation more complicated was that humans had apparently known about their quarantine. Secret monitoring stations had detected human vessels observing galactic shipping lanes from beyond their system's borders. They had made no attempts to break the quarantine, but they were clearly aware of the wider galaxy and chose to remain isolated. Recent intelligence suggested that human technology had continued advancing during their isolation. While their ships remained crude by galactic standards, they had developed weapons systems that prioritized effectiveness over elegance. Their space-based installations showed signs of extensive military preparation, as if they had been anticipating eventual conflict. The final file in the collection was barely a day old, added by automated monitoring systems. It showed increased activity throughout the Sol system, with human military vessels moving into defensive positions. Somehow, despite being quarantined for centuries, they knew about the Devourer threat. The implications were staggering. Elo sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by what she had discovered. The galaxy's peaceful civilizations faced extinction at the hands of an enemy they could not defeat with their current resources and methods. But hidden away in a quarantined system was a species that specialized in the kind of warfare that civilized beings had deliberately forgotten. The choice before the Galactic Council was terrible in its simplicity. They could maintain their principles and face extinction with dignity, or they could abandon everything they believed about civilized behavior and ask for help from the most dangerous species in the galaxy. As she prepared to carry her findings to the Council, Elo realized that either choice would change them forever. If they faced extinction, their peaceful civilization would die with honor. If they survived with human help, they would have to live with the knowledge of what they had unleashed to save themselves. The Forbidden Archives had revealed more than historical secrets. They had shown her the price that might have to be paid for survival, and she was no longer certain it was a price worth paying. The research vessel Harmony drifted at the edge of the Sol system like a leaf approaching a forest fire. Ambassador Reland stood in the observation deck, watching the quarantine beacon that had warned peaceful civilizations away from this system for over 3 centuries. Today, for the first time since its installation, someone would cross that boundary with official council authorization. The small diplomatic ship carried only essential personnel. Captain Nira had volunteered to pilot the mission, bringing along her minimal crew of 12. They all understood that they might not return. The galaxy's most dangerous species waited beyond that beacon, and no one knew how humans would react to visitors after centuries of enforced isolation. Proximity sensors are detecting movement, reported Lieutenant Vara from her station. Multiple contacts approaching our position at high speed. Her voice carried the tension they all felt as the reality of their situation became clear. After 300 years of quarantine, humanity's first response to visitors was to send armed vessels. The ships that emerged from the inner system were unlike anything in the galactic database. Where most civilizations favored graceful curves and organic designs, human vessels were angular and predatory. Their hulls bristled with weapon systems that served no purpose other than destruction. Even their engines glowed with a harsh light that suggested barely contained violence. "Unknown vessel," came a transmission that made several crew members flinch. The human voice was cold and mechanical, stripped of any diplomatic courtesy. "You are in violation of quarantine protocols. State your business or be destroyed." No threats, no warnings, just a simple statement of intent that chilled everyone who heard it. Rylan activated the communication system with hands that trembled slightly. "This is Ambassador Rylan of the Galactic Council, aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony. We request permission to approach Earth under emergency provisions of the Galactic Charter." He paused, knowing that his next words would determine their fate. "We need your help." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. Rylan could see the human ships maintaining their intercept course, weapons powered and ready. These beings had clearly been preparing for conflict, and their first instinct was to treat any intrusion as an attack. The peaceful delegation was completely defenseless against vessels designed for war. "Follow the designated course," the human voice finally responded. "Any deviation will be interpreted as hostile intent." Navigation data appeared on their screens, showing a path through the system that kept them under constant observation. Automated defense platforms tracked their movement from asteroid bases, and patrol vessels shadowed them at weapons range. The journey to Earth revealed a civilization that had spent centuries preparing for war. The asteroid belt had been converted into a massive shipyard, where hundreds of vessels were under construction. Mars showed the scars of extensive mining operations that had transformed its surface into a resource extraction facility. The entire system was a fortress designed to produce and deploy military force on a scale that dwarfed anything in galactic history. "They have been busy," Captain Nira observed quietly as they passed a space station that was larger than most planetary cities. The structure was covered with weapons that could destroy a fleet, but more disturbing were the construction bays where new ships were taking shape. The humans had not been waiting passively during their quarantine. Earth's moon dominated their final approach, its surface covered with installations that glowed with industrial activity. The lunar complex was clearly the center of human space operations, a facility that combined military command, scientific research, and manufacturing on a staggering scale. The Harmony was guided to a docking bay that could have housed a dozen ships their size. The reception committee that met them was small, but intimidating. Admiral Cross appeared to be the senior human representative, a woman whose bearing suggested decades of military command. Her uniform was practical rather than ceremonial, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. Behind her stood two other officers whose expressions showed polite interest mixed with clear suspicion. "Ambassador," Admiral Cross said without preamble, "you have 5 minutes to explain why the Galactic Council has decided to break 3 centuries of quarantine." Her directness was jarring after a lifetime of diplomatic courtesy, but Rylan realized that human culture clearly valued efficiency over politeness. The briefing room where they met was stark and functional, with displays showing real-time intelligence data from across the galaxy. Rylan was disturbed to realize that the humans had been monitoring galactic communications despite their isolation. They knew about the Devourer threat, the military casualties, and the refugee crisis. They had been watching the galaxy die while remaining safely hidden behind their quarantine. "The Devourers have consumed 43 star systems," Rylan began, activating his holographic display. "Our combined fleets have suffered 80% casualties. Current projections show complete galactic extinction within 8 months." He paused, meeting Admiral Cross's cold stare. "We need military assistance from a species with appropriate combat experience." Admiral Cross studied the tactical data with professional interest, but her expression never changed. "You want us to fight your war," she said bluntly. "The same civilizations that locked us away like dangerous animals now come begging for help." Her words carried no anger, just a statement of fact that made the request even more uncomfortable. "We understand the irony," Rylan admitted, feeling the weight of centuries of mistrust. "But the alternative is extinction for every peaceful species in the galaxy. Billions of innocent lives will be lost if we cannot find a way to stop the Devourers." The other human officers exchanged glances that suggested rapid communication. Rylan realized they were probably connected through technological implants that allowed silent coordination. Everything about their behavior suggested a military precision that peaceful species had never developed. "Show us the combat recordings," Admiral Cross commanded. For the next hour, they reviewed every major engagement with the Devourers, analyzing tactics and weapon effectiveness with disturbing expertise. The humans asked questions that revealed an understanding of warfare that went far beyond anything in galactic military doctrine. "Your strategy is fundamentally flawed," Admiral Cross finally announced. "You are fighting a defensive war against an enemy that grows stronger with every engagement. Your weapons are designed to disable rather than destroy. Your tactics prioritize minimizing casualties over achieving victory." She stood, pacing to a wall display that showed human military formations. "You fight like civilized beings. The Devourers fight like predators. What would you do differently?" Captain Nira asked, though her voice suggested she might not want to know the answer. "Everything," Admiral Cross replied without hesitation. "Total war doctrine. No prisoners, no mercy, no rules of engagement. Every resource dedicated to complete enemy annihilation." She turned back to face them, and her expression was colder than the space between stars. "We would hunt them down and kill every single unit until none remain. Then we would hunt down whatever created them and kill that too." The silence in the room was deafening. The peaceful delegation had known intellectually that humans approached warfare differently, but hearing it stated so bluntly was deeply disturbing. These beings did not fight to defend themselves, but to eliminate threats permanently. "The cost would be enormous," Ryland said quietly. "Military casualties alone would number in the millions." "The cost of losing is extinction," Admiral Cross replied. "Military casualties are acceptable when the alternative is the death of every living being in the galaxy." She paused, studying their faces. "But you already know that, or you would not be here." The final moment of decision arrived with terrifying clarity. Admiral Cross stood before them, representing humanity's answer to their desperate plea. "We will help," she said, her voice carrying the weight of military authority. "But we do this our way. No interference, no oversight, no rules of engagement. You want the most dangerous species in the galaxy to save you. You are about to get exactly what you asked for." As they prepared to return to Centauri Prime with humanity's response, Rylan realized they had crossed more than just a quarantine boundary. They had stepped into a darkness that their peaceful civilization had spent centuries trying to escape. The question now was whether they would still recognize themselves after humanity was finished saving them. The human fleet arrived without fanfare or ceremony. No grand formations or impressive displays of power marked their entry into galactic space. Instead, thousands of predatory vessels simply appeared at the edge of Devourer territory like shadows materializing from nightmare. Their arrival was detected not by sensors but by the sudden silence of Devourer communications across 17 star systems. "General," Cato watched the tactical displays with growing unease as human ships dispersed throughout the combat zone. Unlike the massive battleships favored by galactic civilizations, the human vessels were smaller, faster, and seemed to move with pack-hunting instincts. Each group operated independently, while maintaining coordination that suggested a level of tactical sophistication that made traditional military doctrine obsolete. "They are not following standard engagement protocols," observed Admiral Zoran from his command center. "No formation flights, no defensive positions, no clear chain of command structure. They appear to be operating as independent hunting units." The first engagement occurred in the ruins of the frontier colonies, where a Devourer construction swarm was converting asteroid fields into new units. Commander Brooks led a squadron of 50 human vessels directly into the heart of the enemy formation, ignoring the careful approach strategies that galactic forces had developed over months of bitter experience. "Human squadron is moving to direct contact with Devourer central mass," reported the observation post. "They are not maintaining safe distances. Repeat, human vessels are deliberately entering absorption range." The communications officer paused, his voice filled with confusion. "Sir, they appear to be allowing themselves to be consumed by the Devourers." What happened next challenged every assumption about combat with the mechanical entities. As Devourer units began their standard absorption process, converting human ships into raw materials, the vessels simply exploded. Not the clean destruction of weapon impacts, but massive antimatter detonations that erupted from within the Devourer swarm itself. The explosions chained through the enemy formation as human ships, converted into bombs designed to detonate at maximum damage range. Within minutes, the entire Devourer construction operation was reduced to expanding clouds of metallic debris. The human squadron had sacrificed itself completely, taking 10 times their number of enemies with them in a display of tactical ruthlessness that left galactic observers speechless. Casualties? Admiral Zorin asked, though the answer was obvious. Total human losses for Squadron 7, came the reply. All 50 vessels destroyed with no survivors. Devourer casualties estimated at over 500 units plus the complete loss of their construction facility. Similar reports flooded in from across the combat zone as humans implemented warfare strategies that violated every principle of civilized conflict. Captain Steele's task force destroyed entire star systems ahead of advancing devourers, denying them resources by converting planets into expanding nuclear fire. The environmental destruction was staggering, but it worked. For the first time since the war began, devourer expansion was actually slowing. The most disturbing development was humanity's approach to devourer technology. While galactic scientists had spent months trying to understand the enemy's construction methods, human research teams simply captured devourer units and performed live dissections. Dr. Chen's laboratory reports made for horrifying reading as she described techniques for converting captured enemies into weapon systems. The devourers operate on quantum mechanical conversion principles. Dr. Chen explained during a briefing that several galactic representatives refused to attend. By introducing viral code sequences into their base programming, we can turn their own adaptive abilities against them. Captured units can be reprogrammed to attack their original swarm. The virus weapons that resulted from this research were biological warfare applied to mechanical entities. Human-modified devourers infiltrated enemy swarms and began converting other units to human control. The sight of devourer constructs turning on their own kind was deeply disturbing to species that valued individual consciousness, but it proved devastatingly effective. They fight without honor, complained Elder Morn during an emergency council session. These humans use deception, sacrifice, and corruption as primary tactics. They show no regard for the dignity of their enemies or the preservation of their own forces. Ambassador Relan found himself defending humanity's methods despite his own discomfort. They are winning, he said simply. For the first time in this war, the devourers are being pushed back. Human casualties are enormous, but they are achieving results that our combined fleets could not. The tactical report supported his statement. Human forces had reclaimed 12 star systems in 3 months of operations. Their losses were catastrophic by galactic standards, with 60% casualty rates that would have broken any civilized military. But human reinforcements continued arriving from the Sol system, and their production capacity seemed designed to sustain exactly this kind of grinding warfare. What disturbed galactic observers most was humanity's apparent comfort with such losses. Human commanders spoke of acceptable casualty rates that would have ended any other species' participation in the conflict. They planned operations that assumed massive losses while maintaining unit effectiveness. Most chilling of all, human soldiers seemed to understand and accept the probability of their own deaths. They do not fight to survive, Dr. Yenna observed after studying human combat psychology. They fight to achieve objectives regardless of personal cost. This represents a form of warfare that our peaceful evolution has made impossible for us to comprehend. The turning point came when humanity implemented what they called scorched earth tactics on a galactic scale. Rather than defending territory, human forces began systematically destroying everything that could be useful to the devourers. Stars were destabilized using gravity bombs. Planets were rendered uninhabitable through atmospheric poisoning. Entire sectors were cleared of all matter that could be converted into enemy units. The environmental cost was beyond calculation. Civilizations that had taken millions of years to develop were erased in hours to deny resources to the enemy. The devourers found themselves advancing through empty void, their expansion slowing as they encountered systems stripped of everything useful. "We are destroying our own galaxy to save it," Captain Nira observed during one of her reports to the Council. "The humans are winning, but the victory may cost us everything we fought to preserve." Yet the strategy worked with brutal efficiency. Devourer swarms that had seemed unstoppable found themselves starved of raw materials. Their adaptive advantages meant nothing when there was nothing left to adapt to. The mechanical entities that had conquered 43 star systems were reduced to scavenging debris and increasingly desperate attempts to maintain their numbers. The final phase of human operations began 6 months after their arrival. Having successfully starved the main devourer swarms, humanity turned its attention to the source. Deep space reconnaissance had located the origin point, where the first devourers had entered the galaxy. Whatever had created them was still out there, potentially capable of sending more waves of destruction. Admiral Cross personally led the expedition beyond the galactic rim, taking with her the most advanced human weaponry developed during the conflict. The fleet that departed was smaller than previous human forces but carried weapons that defied galactic understanding. Antimatter bombs capable of sterilizing solar systems, quantum viruses designed to corrupt reality itself, time dilation weapons that could age entire fleets to dust in seconds. "We are going to find whoever sent these things," Admiral Cross announced during her final briefing, "and we are going to kill them so completely that they will never threaten anyone again. This is not about defense or survival anymore. This is about making sure that nothing like the Devourers ever emerges from the void again." The expedition disappeared beyond the galactic edge, carrying with it humanity's promise to end the threat permanently. For weeks, there was no communication from the human fleet. Long-range sensors detected massive energy discharges from the void beyond known space. Explosions so powerful they briefly outshone entire star clusters. When Admiral Cross finally returned, her fleet was reduced to a handful of battered vessels. The survivors spoke in whispers about what they had found in the darkness between galaxies. An ancient intelligence that had been seeding the universe with devourer swarms for millions of years. A mechanical god that consumed galaxies for reasons that mortal minds could not comprehend. "It will not be sending any more devourers," Admiral Cross reported with characteristic bluntness. "The threat is permanently eliminated." She paused, her expression showing exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. The cost was acceptable. The war was over, but the galaxy that emerged from the conflict was fundamentally changed. Entire sectors lay empty and lifeless, their civilizations sacrificed to deny resources to the enemy. The survivors carried the knowledge of what they had witnessed, the terrible price of salvation delivered by the most dangerous species in the galaxy. As human ships prepared to return to their quarantine zone, the galactic community struggled with what they had learned about themselves. When faced with extinction, they had willingly embraced the darkness they had spent centuries trying to escape. They had asked monsters to save them, and the monsters had delivered exactly what they promised. The silence in space was deafening after months of constant warfare. Where once the galaxy had thrummed with the mechanical harmony of devourer swarms, now only emptiness remained. Debris fields marked the locations of final battles, their twisted metal cooling in the cosmic void. The war was over, but the cost of victory was becoming clear to everyone who had witnessed humanity's methods. Ambassador Ryland stood on the observation deck of Centauri Prime's orbital station, watching human ships prepare for their departure. The vessels that had arrived like harbingers of salvation now seemed different somehow. Their angular hulls bore the scars of battles that had redefined the meaning of warfare. More disturbing were the modifications visible on their surfaces, adaptations made from captured devourer technology that gave them an alien appearance. The casualty reports made for difficult reading. Humanity's expeditionary force had suffered losses that would have ended any other species' participation in the conflict. Over 60% of their military personnel were gone, their ships converted to expanding gas clouds in battles that prioritized victory over survival. Yet the humans showed no signs of trauma or regret over these losses. "Final tactical assessment," Admiral Cross announced during her departure briefing. Her voice carried the same cold efficiency it had shown throughout the conflict. "Devourer threat permanently eliminated. Enemy source neutralized beyond galactic rim. No further military action required." She paused, consulting data displays that showed the empty sectors where civilizations once thrived. Contract fulfilled. The word contract disturbed many council members. To humanity, saving the galaxy had been a military mission with specific objectives and acceptable losses. There was no emotion in their assessment, no pride in their accomplishment, just professional satisfaction at a job completed successfully. The mechanical precision of their thinking rivaled that of the enemies they had destroyed. General Cato reviewed the strategic aftermath with mixed feelings. "The Devourer threat is indeed eliminated," he reported to the Council. "However, the methods used to achieve this victory have left 17 star systems completely uninhabitable. The environmental damage from human operations exceeds what the Devourers might have accomplished in months of normal expansion. The scorched earth tactics that had proven so effective carried a price that was only now becoming apparent. Entire sectors of the galaxy were dead zones where nothing could survive. Stars had been destabilized, planets reduced to radioactive slag, and space itself poisoned with exotic radiation that would persist for millennia. The humans had saved the galaxy by making parts of it uninhabitable. More troubling were the psychological effects on galactic civilization itself. The peaceful species that had formed the Council were struggling to process what they had witnessed and authorized. The same beings who had spent centuries developing ethical frameworks for conflict resolution had watched approvingly as humanity committed acts that violated every principle they claimed to value. We asked them to become monsters, Elder Morn observed during a closed session of senior council members. And when they delivered exactly what we requested, we were horrified by our own reflection. The Devourers threatened to destroy our bodies, but humanity has shown us something darker about our souls. The refugee crisis added another layer of complexity to the aftermath. 43 billion beings had been displaced during the conflict, many from worlds that no longer existed. The survivors carried stories of human military operations that challenged galactic understanding of acceptable warfare. Children spoke of human soldiers who had fought with suicidal bravery to protect evacuation ships, while adults described tactical decisions that sacrificed entire populations to deny resources to the enemy. Dr. Yena's psychological assessments revealed disturbing patterns among the survivors. Many reported a new understanding of violence that their peaceful evolution had never prepared them to process. Some expressed admiration for human effectiveness despite their horror at human methods. Others suffered from what she termed moral displacement disorder, an inability to reconcile their previous ethical framework with the reality of what survival had required. The most difficult conversations took place between species representatives and human commanders preparing for departure. Captain Nira found herself facing Commander Evans, one of the few human officers to survive the entire campaign. The human's expression showed professional courtesy, but no warmth or connection to the beings they had saved. "Your losses were enormous," Nira said, struggling to express gratitude for sacrifices that defied her understanding. "How do your people cope with such casualties?" Commander Evans considered the question with the same analytical approach he applied to tactical problems. "Acceptable losses are calculated before operations begin," he replied. "Personnel understand the mission parameters and probability of survival. Emotional attachment to individual outcomes would compromise operational effectiveness." The clinical nature of his response was more disturbing than any display of emotion might have been. Humanity had developed a relationship with death and violence that allowed them to function effectively in situations that would break other species. They were not cruel or sadistic, just professionally efficient at applying maximum force to achieve strategic objectives. The final departure ceremony was deliberately understated. Humanity had no interest in parades or public recognition for their role in galactic salvation. Admiral Cross delivered a brief statement acknowledging the successful completion of their mission and confirming their intention to return to voluntary quarantine. No speeches, no emotional farewells, just a military unit completing its assignment and returning to base. As the human fleet prepared to enter hyperspace, young Lieutenant Dex from the Alterian Republic made an observation that would haunt diplomatic circles for generations. "We learned something important about the most dangerous species in the galaxy," he said quietly. "The most frightening thing about humans is not their capacity for violence. It is that they choose when to use it." The insight was profound and deeply unsettling. Humanity had demonstrated the ability to wage total war with ruthless efficiency, but they had also shown restraint when dealing with their allies. They could have conquered the galaxy after eliminating the Devourers, but they chose to honor their agreement and return to isolation. The same species capable of sterilizing star systems had protected refugee ships at enormous cost to themselves. The quarantine beacon at the edge of the Sol system was reactivated as human ships crossed back into their restricted space. But the message had been updated by unanimous council vote. Where once it had warned of dangerous predators to be avoided, now it carried different words. Approach with respect. Heroes dwell here. The galaxy had been saved, but it would never be the same. Every peaceful species now carried the knowledge that survival sometimes required embracing the darkness they had spent millennia trying to escape. They had learned that monsters could be heroes, that salvation could come from sources they feared most, and that the price of civilization might be the willingness to abandon it when extinction was the alternative. In the years that followed, no species would look at the stars the same way. Somewhere beyond that quarantine beacon lived beings who had chosen to be their protectors, rather than their conquerors. The most dangerous species in the galaxy had proven themselves to be exactly what desperate civilizations needed when hope was gone, and only the unthinkable remained. The war was over. The galaxy was safe, and humanity had returned to the shadows where they waited patiently for the next time their particular skills might be needed. It was a terrifying comfort, but comfort nonetheless.